that a little bit. It is noisy out there. So basically, we just want to, I'm just going to bring up the browser, and I'm just going to search for Mongo, and we'll do MongoDB, I guess, download. And I'll just go again to MongoDB download. And we do not need to see if I can find the, this is a different website than what I got to last time. Let's see. We don't want it on the cloud. We don't want Atlas, so let's go back. That isn't quite what I want. Yeah, so down here, that's probably a better one. Yes, that is, because we want the community server. Atlas is hosted on the cloud. Actually, that would be, it's nice to have things hosted. One of these days, I would like to teach these things on the cloud. I've always been a little leery of it because it could cost money. Even AWS gives us a student account and it gives us a certain amount of money that you could have as a student. But if you go over your allotted amount, they start charging. And the way you could do that is simply to leave it on when you're away from it, right? You basically can turn it on, do something, and then you have to close it all down. If you don't close it all down, then it'll start charging you money after a bit. So it's a little dangerous. Azure is a little better in that it's Microsoft's cloud, in that when you run out of money, they just won't let you do anything. They don't charge you for it, so that's better. But we're going to do the community server, and we're just going to download it. So just click the download MSI. It knows that we're on Windows. Mongo will work on anything. You can run it on Linux. You can run it on Mac. It will literally run on anything. So it's kind of like MySQL like that. So I'm going to download the MSI. You do not have to register. You can if you want, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to run the install. You could also save it and run it from downloads if you want. Okay, so I'm going to minimize that. It won't let me. Yeah, I do. I was just going to try to zoom up first. Come on. Can I zoom? Oh, there it is. Okay. Come on. That's interesting. I just want to get it there in center. It's jumping around so crazy here. There we go. So basically, we just want to do it. We're going to just hit next. I did this just a day or two ago, and it is a little different than when I taught it last. So I will show you a little bit of the differences. You do have to accept. If you don't accept, it won't happen. And we'll just do complete. And then when you do that, we're going to. So one of the differences is this right here. It has a graphical interface. I've never had one before. It's a pretty clunky graphical interface, and we might be better off with the command line. So I'll probably show you both. But we might as well install it since it's there. I'm going to do install. There should be a pop-up in a moment, yes, where you just say, yes, you are going to allow this. If you're doing it on the underlying machine, that's where I would have to run over and give you permission. What? That's the machine. should do it individually. But I could get permission. There are a couple little things we have to do once it's done. And this is taking longer here than it has ever taken me before, because it usually takes like that. Once we do this, I'm going to talk about what a NoSql database is, because it's very different than what we've worked with before. They all hanging at about the same place. Hopefully it'll go through all right.
So using Mongo and command line, is that going to be different on Windows versus other operating systems?
So I don't know. Has anybody done Mongo on a Mac?
It was pretty easy. You just install the compass after that.
But the like command line usage, is that the same same commands as it is on Windows?
So there is a, it's not purely, there's a command line client.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so once you're in that client, the commands are the same no matter what platform you're on.
Are you going to be doing Mongo next week as well?
Yes. We're going to spend some time on Mongo. Not much more than we spend on the relational, but this is sort of a one-off as opposed to two-off, I guess. Come on, why is it taking so long to install here?
Their server wasn't ready for a whole class room.
That may be. It may be every time I did it before, I did it solo.
So what are the major differences between Mongo and SQL?
So there aren't any tables. There aren't any columns and rows per se. There's no relational structure. It's wide open. It's all done in JavaScript. And the thing is, developers tend to really like it because you don't have, when you do a relational database, we rush the process, right? We did it in a couple of weeks. But in real life, when you make a relational database, if you're making it at all decently and you have the database people collaborating on it, it could take several weeks to create the structure and the schema, for a relational database and to validate it all and get all the, relations proper and etc. NoSql has very little to none of that. So it's very easy to develop against very quickly. It has some drawbacks, which we'll talk about in a bit. One drawback is that because it doesn't have any schema or structure, there's no relational integrity. You're totally dependent on the programming and the environment that you create to support that. Why is that taking so long? Again, it's not hard. It's just taking a while. Yours is done already? Yours is done. Yours is done. Yours is done. Yours is done. All right. So you need to figure out a working. You do have a working. Okay. That's right. You're getting there. I'm at finish. It just took longer than I'm used to. So this is the graphical environment. It has an agreement, which you can read. Boy, this is jumpy today, or is it me? I generally don't read them, but you should probably. Who knows what you're agreeing to when they come for your firstborn or your cat or something. You know. So I'm going to agree. So the top part here, which you can look at if you want. Boy, that's jumpy. It's basically just explaining how to use things. Okay, so when it says start use, God, I'm going to make you dizzy and I'm going to drive me crazy. So the server actually isn't running right now. So if you try to connect, you'll just get an error. Just to show you, you get an error. Okay. There's a couple of things we have to do. Are most people at this stage? You had to restart? Huh.
Still installing.
Okay. I could wait a minute. Yeah, that's mostly that page. It's just telling you how to navigate. So the thing that you have to do, there's a couple of things you have to do. And I'll go over more than once if need be. So, and I have no idea why the install doesn't do this. But in the File Explorer, we need to go to this PC, C drive, and we need to create a folder. And I'm going to, God, I don't remember it being so jumpy. New folder. And I'm going to call it data. Lowercase is probably better. It doesn't seem to care, but. And then inside of data, so what I did is I right-clicked, did new, and created a folder. And this is on C drive. So it needs to be literally right in on the root. And then inside of data, I'm going to create two folders. So I'm going to do a new folder. And this one is going to be called DB. And then I'm going to create a folder called log. And weirdly, it won't work if you don't do this. And why doesn't the install just add these folders? And I do not know on a Mac where these folders would go.
Probably desktop.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure, but you did.
I just did it on the desktop. I haven't tried it yet. So.
Okay. You might have to look up on a, if there's a different place. Desktop might work. I don't know. But the data folder is where your database will go. So right click at C drive and it'll be like this data. And then inside of data, I have DB and log, two more folders. Okay, now there's the other thing. Do you guys need a minute on that? Everybody okay there? Okay. So I should do this with command line, but I'll spare you a little bit of command line. So I am going to go to this PC, local disk, program files, MongoDB server 3.6, bin. Actually, I don't necessarily want to do it from here. In the command line, if you want to get to the executables, that's the path, right? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it out here on the desktop. I'm going to do new shortcut, And my shortcut is going to go there, from there. Oh, come on, quit bouncing. So I'm going to do this PC, C drive, program files, MongoDB. So in MongoDB, I'm going to go server 3.6 bin. All right. So I right-clicked on the desktop, right? And what I did is I did right-click and I did new shortcut. And then it brings up this dialog box, which is dancing around on this. I did not know. It must be me. Too much caffeine or something. And then I do browse, this PC, local disk C, program files, not the one with x86, MongoDB, and we want to go down to bin, so server 3.6 bin, and we want MongoD. And then I'm going to do OK, and next, and finish. And what this is the server. This is the actual server. Do you want me to do that whole thing again?
No.
Does anybody, what? MongoD. MongoD is the server. Typically, the way I would actually have always taught it in the past, but this is easier, is to bring up the command line and then just go cd / cd program files MongoDB. Those are the wrong way. This is DOS. MongoDB server 3.6 bin, and then I could do MongoD from there. But instead, to keep you from having to type that in, we made a shortcut. So when I click that, it actually runs MongoD. And when this is running, it has connections, right? It's waiting for connections. This is the actual server running in the background. And you have to start it. It needs a manual start. But because the shortcut here, I don't have to go to the path and run it.
When is it supposed to connect?
So it should connect now. If we do,
Oh, okay.
whoa. Let me unzip here, unzoom, because I'm lost on that. I maximized it. So if I connect right now,
Yes.
it should connect. And then I'll zoom up again.
So the order is launch the MongoD, executables, then go with the compass.
Right. Now this is the compass, right? So now that I've got the server running, I can connect. And it shows me that there's two built-in databases. There's admin and there's local. As I said, this is kind of clumsy, and you might actually find the command line better. I'll show you both.
That's good. So this is found what? This executable? This GUI.
This GUI should be up already. It should do that compass. Compass that little yeah, don't just go it. So run it. Yeah, that command line thing that's running is the server, the actual Mongo server. And we are standalone and etc. I guess I'll show you a tiny little bit. We'll create a database. And it wants, so I'm just going to call it, there's a little button that says create database. Should be right at the top.
Green one.
Yeah. And I will create it, and let's call it test. And I'm going to call it test collection. So I'm going to talk about this in a moment, what a collection is versus a database, etc. When I create that, so now I've got test and have test collection. When I click on test collection, it says I can insert a document. And it gives me this weird thing here. So I'm going to say test name. I'm going to tab. I'll just say first test. I'm going to tab again. What do I want to say about the test? I'm bored. I mean, it is boring. Testing. Testy. Test description. It's a testy test. Okay.
There you go.
And I'm going to let that be for right now, and I'm just going to do insert, and it will create a little object there. Okay, so this is sort of how this works. It's a little bit weird, and I'll show you some things. And when we work on this, you can work on the. I'm looking to see if indexes. I'd like to show you this the way that it actually should look, but I'll just let this be for right now. I'm going to bring up another, the command line, and I'll show you that, and then we'll talk about what all of this is, because it's very weird. So I'm going to, I guess I'll just do the same way. I could do it just with the command line, but I'm at the same place here, so let's go to the desktop. I'm going to make another shortcut. So a new shortcut. And it will give me, if I can find it, here it is, the same path thing. So I'm going to go to the same place. So I'm going to go this PC, C drive, program files, MongoDB, and then in bin, this time I want just Mongo. So this is the path. C program files, MongoDB, server, 3.6, bin, Mongo exec. This is the command line client. Okay, so it should be, if I run it, so it says, welcome to the Mongo shell. This is what they had before they had the compass. As I said, I'll show you how to use both, but this is just a real quick overview because I want to give you time to do other things. So I just want you to get this installed. And look, so if I say use test, it says switch to DB test. Did I name it with an uppercase letter, do you remember, or lowercase?
Meaning that, yes.
All right, so let's use test with an uppercase. Switch to DB test. Notice it doesn't care whether it exists or not. In fact, if it doesn't exist and you say to use it, it will create it. Which is a bit of a pain, actually, to have it created so easily. So I'm going to see, inside of test, I had test collection. So I'm going to do db dot find with parentheses. And notice it finds the ID, this object that we made in the other form. But this is the way it actually looks. It's got a curly brace at the beginning. It's got a curly brace at the end. It generated its own ID, right? You can override that by putting your ID in there if you want. Notice it's got quotes, colon. So this is it's mostly what they call name value pairs. This is the name, this is the value, this is the name, this is the value. Does that make sense? Has anybody ever done JSON before? So it's a type of JavaScript. It's a way in JavaScript to define and move data. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So it uses that instead of SQL. It uses it for the queries too. I'll show you later. This is just a broad introduction. Don't worry if it doesn't stick. We'll be playing with it. In some ways, this is a nicer environment than the other one, but if you prefer the visual, that's fine. In terms of, whoops, I already had that installed. I didn't need to double click it. I mean, I already had it up. I probably have 2 copies open now. If you want a picture of this with a couple of data, this would show that you've installed Mongo, because one of the assignments is just to install Mongo. The other thing you could do is, if you want, you could just do, if I can get down to the bottom, one of the, just a picture of the, not that one, a picture of the thing running. So like this, just a picture of that would be good too. Just something to show that it's installed. Right? So I imagine you're all very confused. So I think what I'm going to do is go into, first of all, I'm going to unzoom a minute. I'm going to go into Canvas, and there's a PowerPoint. I think I will do the PowerPoint. I hate PowerPoints, particularly when it's hot and stifle in the room. Just to get the basic concepts across. And we can talk about it a little bit, too. And we'll be playing with it. This is all, my big goal today is just to get it installed and talk about it a little bit. Starting on Thursday, we will start actually doing stuff with it. So let's go to Canvas. I have no idea what that is logging into. Yes, I know.
It's just came out within a year.
Mongo's been around for a while, but this version is new. The GUI, yeah, it wasn't there the last time. Now, there are other GUIs that you can get, though they're similar to this one. They're a bit awkward. This compass is new, though. All right, so I want to go to, this is the right class, that's good. I'm going to go to the modules. And I'm going to go down to the Mongo, and I'll do the NoSql. And we'll do it as a show. Yes, I know it's yours. So I want to do present. Let's make that bigger. Okay. So NoSql, as I said, it's a fairly new thing in databases. NoSql databases have been around for maybe 5 years. I mean, they haven't been around for a long time. SQL databases have been around since the 1970s. Right? They are pretty much the standard database structure. But there have been a lot of attempts over time to create something that was different, some different kind of database, because not everything fits into columns and rows, right? Not every kind of data fits neatly in that kind of structure. And also, as we talked about, relational databases, SQL-based databases are complicated. You saw that. They're hard to get all the pieces working. They're very complicated. So they wanted something simpler, faster, easier to develop against. And NoSQL has become the standard for that. And the reason I'm showing it is that a lot of times in the database world, you'll have to deal with both the NoSQL databases and the relational databases. So they can actually interact. In fact, SQL Server right now can take a JSON, which we'll talk about more in a minute, the structure of a NoSQL file. If it isn't too complicated, because a JSON file can be really complicated, but if it isn't too complicated, the SQL Server can take it and put it into table structure. And the table data in SQL Server can be transferred into JSON. And that's true with MySQL too. You can move them back and forth. So you can make these two types of databases talk to each other. In general, so they have less or no schema. And what that means is that they don't have a set structure. You may be putting product information in there, but if one product has a description and another doesn't, you just leave the description out. You don't have null, so that field just isn't in the second object. That makes sense? There's no set structure that you have to enforce in any collection. And a collection is what they call a table, kind of. It's just a collection of JSON objects. There's nothing in the database that would keep you from having a collection of just really mixed objects that have nothing to do with each other, except that logic suggests that that's not very useful. But there's nothing in the database that would prevent that from happening. But so they can vary in structure, and that can be all right. Sometimes a thing has some information and another part doesn't. And they just, rather than have a null in the table, they just leave that part out. They don't enforce referential integrity. In a relational database, the big bugaboo is repetition. You should never repeat information, right? In NoSQL, they repeat it everywhere. And with all the problems that can have. If you spell it differently in one place, you may not retrieve it in a query. But there's no joins, no enforced keys. There's no repetition is fairly common. So the advantages, they tend to be really fast. One reason that they're really fast is that they don't have to check referential integrity. They just retrieve the data. They're really excellent for collecting and storing things that don't fit into columns and rows real well, particularly social media. So one of the things I did playing with this is I took a little Python file and went and got the Twitter feed. So Twitter is in a JSON structure. It comes from a NoSQL database. And you can populate, I got thousands of records in seconds. Just searching for the word science, although most of what I got was science fiction. And you can search for different things and you can get all the records. And it's really, NoSQL databases are really good for that kind of thing, for scraping social media data, websites and things, and getting that kind of information. Facebook, things like that are really good. And if you think about the information in those, they're not really good for a traditional database. There's pictures, there's videos, there's all different kinds of media, there's text, there's there's all sorts of a mixed kind of media that makes more sense sometimes just to take it rather than try to sort it into columns and rows. So those are the advantages. Some of the disadvantages are they don't enforce relational integrity, so they have all the risks and problems of redundancy. you type something differently in one place than another place, you may not be able to get the information back that you're intending. One of the big advantages of non-relational NoSQL databases is that they can be distributed across the internet. So they can be, you can spread one database across thousands of machines. That's really good for scalability. So when you're talking about big data, when you're talking about multiple terabytes of data, that is a really nice thing to be able to grow just by adding more machines to the network. With a relational database, on the other hand, the typical way to grow a database is to buy bigger and bigger hard drives, right? So, and there are some huge hard drives out there, but that's the way you do it. And just getting multiple hard drives in a row, basically, is what you do. But you can't just spread it across the internet. But the disadvantage of that is that they do not guarantee what are called ACID transactions. Have you guys ever heard that without the context being LSD? ACID means atomicity, that every transaction is independent of every other transaction. It's isolated, which is this, it happens separate from other transactions. It's consistent. Everybody that calls back the information on this transaction gets the same answer, and it lasts. That if you come back a week from now, it's still the same answer. Right? That's what relational databases do this well. They don't guarantee this with NoSQL databases. They have what's called eventual consistency. Eventually you'll get an answer that's consistent. Part of the reason is because of the distributed nature of it. I mean, ours would be fairly consistent because we're just doing it local, one place, and not spread across the internet. But they use basically an algorithm that Google developed for searches. Was put into this. It's called Hadoop. Have you ever heard of Hadoop? Anyway, it's basically a structure for querying across multiple, domains. And they use that for this. And one of the things is you want to return an answer in a reasonable amount of time. So if you ping a database and it's offline or it's slow, you just ignore it and go to the next, right? So you pull up all the data that you can get in a reasonable amount of time. But that means you never have a complete data set, right? Because there's always going to be some of the data that doesn't return. It doesn't matter so much if what you're looking for are general trends in big data. It does matter an awful lot if what you're trying to do is keep track of your accounting. So NoSQL is not your best bet for doing point of sale transactions or accounting or inventory kinds of things. You can make it do that, but the entire burden of making it work is on the programmers that design the front end. They have to keep all the integrity depends on them because the database isn't supporting that. Does that make sense? So there are different flavors of NoSQL. There's key value pairs, and which is kind of what we have with Mongo. Mongo is kind of a mixture of key value and document databases. Column family stores I actually don't understand very well. I've read about it and I still don't understand it. So they treat columns like rows. And I'm not sure how that works. I need to read more on it to actually see it working. Key value pairs, I understand. That's basically you just do a name and a value, right? Graph databases are really neat. Basically, it treats the data points in the database as points in a matrix, and it will draw a picture of that. So maybe you've seen these things of relationships between, like, if you took somebody on Facebook, maybe two people, and you traced all their relationships to see where they intersect, say two people that don't know each other. You could create a matrix document, I mean, a drawing of that. They actually do produce graphical drawings of intersecting data points. They're really kind of neat databases. Again, they're not useful for everything, but for certain kinds of things, they're really, really neat. So those are the kinds. These are all, if you're a business, you're probably suspicious of all NoSQL a little bit because they're so new. They're not what you would call a mature technology yet, but they are growing really fast. Signs that they're not mature are things like Mongo, did you hear, had a huge data breach problem recently? Yeah, because security in these things is a little iffy sometimes. They're getting better. Each version they come out, they add features, encryption, different things. But all those features slow it down too, right? You encrypt things, that slows things down. But if you don't encrypt things, you may have troubles. Okay, so Mongo is one of the most popular. It was one of the earliest. It's free. There are lots of them out there. Amazon Web Services has a database. What do they call it?
AWS.
What?
AWS.
Well, no, that's the service. There's no SQL database that runs on AWS. Dynamo, I want to say, something like that.
I think that
And Facebook has a NoSQL database. I believe it's called Cassandra. They're also building a new one that they want to kind of combine the NoSQL, the advantages of NoSQL, with some of the advantages of a relational database. You know, like making sure that transactions are atomic. Not that that's relevant right here, but Facebook was originally written on MySQL with PHP. So, but they've changed. I mean, they've rewritten everything many times. So, but Mongo is really popular, partially because it's free. Most of them are free at some level, but usually they cost money when you start hosting them and things like that. So we did the server. We ran MongoD, right? And Mongo is the client. So if you use, this is just some advice on use database. I mean, if you say you're going to use a database, it creates the database, which is a bit, as I said, a bit weird. It means you can have a lot of garbage there if you're typing around and not paying attention. You can always delete them, but collections are what they are, like tables, but basically they're collections of objects. So they're collections of JSON objects. Everything in here is done with JSON, which is a form of just a small subpart of JavaScript. JSON basically consists of curly braces to define the limits, and then you just basically a set of key value pairs. So the key is like the name of the field, and then a colon, and then the pair, the name of the value. You just do that, separate them with commas. It can get more complicated than that because you can go, you can have sub-objects. You can have JSON objects inside of JSON objects inside of JSON objects if you want. It can get fairly embedded and complicated. One of the things that I will say, the Mongo documentation is excellent. Everything I've ever wanted to find in there I found fairly easily. So the Mongo documentation is really quite good. You just go to mongo.com documentation, and it's there. This is what you would do just to return everything in a collection. I have text store there. I'm going to show you a couple of other things too. So this is kind of like a real simple JSON. I mean, we're going to keep it relatively simple, but they can get really complicated. I might show you a really complicated one here. So curly brace, underscore ID. The ID, the official ID is always underscore ID. if you put a number here, it will take that number. If you don't put a number, it'll generate its own key, which is going to be about 12 digits long. Again, it's not used like a real key. You don't use it to relate it to other tables, right? It's not like a primary key, foreign key, but it does have to be unique. Does that make sense? So one of the things about not having relations, if you had, you could create something so you could have like customers in one table and sales in another. Again, it's not a big use of it, but there's no way to do an inner join. So what you have to do is you have to do two separate queries. You have to query the customer to figure out their number and then query the sales to figure out what number would go on that. Does that make sense? You have to do two queries. You can't do, there's no joining. So this is the key and this is the value. And again, it can get more complicated than this, but this is just the introduction, and I'm not going to try to make it really complicated. The key is the name of the field, colon separates it, this is the value. Key is price, colon, value. The numeric values don't have to be quoted. Quantity available, colon 15. They didn't invent JSON, by the way. JSON has been part of JavaScript for a long time. And it's used a lot on the web for moving data from a database to a website and back. It's used a lot because it's fairly quick and easy, and because people that know the web are, I mean, JavaScript has become basically the language of the web, for bad, good or ill. Guys know Edge, he hates JavaScript because it's so insecure. Here's another example. This is where you're inserting a whole bunch of things. These are all JSON objects. Notice from curly brace to curly brace. And then there's a square bracket. So it's basically an array of JSON objects. And you could actually insert all of these at once with those square brackets. And this just shows the writing of it. Gives you this message when you write in when it's good. So it inserted 10. There were no up inserts, no matches, none were modified, none were removed. I don't know. It seems excessive. And it's just the name of the collection.insert. And we can do that. We did one insert in this form, which is a little different, but I'll show you both ways. Probably not today. This is a find, just basic. Find is like a select star from, right? It just returns everything. This is a more complicated query. It's actually more complicated than I will ask you to do. This is where you do an aggregate where you're looking for the average price. A lot of built-in functions have $signs for it. But again, don't worry too much about that. And I think that's all of the PowerPoint. Questions on any of that? As I said, that's a lot. I want you to have a sense of this. Again, I'm not expecting you to be to remember even a lot of this. Just get a feel for it. We'll play with it. What we're going to do is similar to what we did with the other things. We're going to build a database. The database will be to track shows. I'm assuming music shows in town at the different venues. Somebody showed me this website actually exists already. But basically, you know, what shows are in town where, what artists, and we'll talk about how you set up the JSON for that, and then how to put the data in it, and we'll do some simple queries of it. That's sort of the plan. You can close this. If I close the server, this is actually not the server. Let me plus up here a little bit. So if you're in the command line, if you do exit, it goes away. And then the Mongo, come on, where is it? There it is. The server you can turn off. If you close the window there, it closes the server. Shuts it off. And Compass you can close also. So notice this looks a little bit like what we did, except it doesn't have the curly braces. It's sort of hiding the curly braces from you. Actually, I'll show you one other thing, and then we'll call it good, because I said I'd give you about an hour to work if you need it. Let's see if I can find this. And I think this is already big enough, so let's minus that. I'm just going to see if I can find the Twitter. That's code to get it. Yeah, this down here is kind of what the JSON looks for, a Twitter feed. It's actually longer. Some of them are longer. Does that actually have the tweet in it? Right. One I have, the ones I was downloading are much bigger. Let's see if I can find another one. Yeah, this is more what I get. So it talks about what the text of it is, but it also gives all the user information, contributors. It also can give you things like that's user information. Sometimes it gives you how many times it's been retweeted and etc. You can do, this is actually, you can query everything in here, so it's actually a great data mining thing. But just nothing we do is going to look like this in complication, but I just wanted to show you that the JSON can be kind of complex looking. The thing is, you can well, usually the first time you have to kind of create this, but once you've created it, usually in some kind of code, you never have to do it again, right? It'll just populate. You can make it just populate. Oh, and one other thing I'll show you, and then this is the last, I promise. I'm going to go to Conger Prep. It's one of the blogs that I have. Conger Prep at blogspot.com. And a couple of things in here. There's first steps with NoSql, and it leads you through setting up this. This is what the command shows before the Compass thing existed. But it goes through setting it up, talks about inserting data, talks a little bit about querying data, how to create a text index, a couple of administrative commands to find out what collections are there and what databases. And then there's a couple others. There's a second Mongo database. One, it brings in a lot of other, just some aggregation and things like that. Again, more than we'll probably do. Mongo 3 actually starts talking about writing Python to interact with Mongo. Python, it's really easy to talk to Mongo with Python. It's actually really easy to do it in C# if you really want it. And then I did I did some PyMongo where I did the Python to insert and read different things. And then this is all just in case you're interested. I did some Python objects to talk to the database. So I did a whole bunch of Python classes. And then I created a form in Python to talk to Mongo. That's as far as I went with Python and Mongo. But if you're interested in that kind of stuff, it's there. And if you're not interested in it, you can ignore it. So I said I'd give you an hour. It's about an hour now. So if you're done, you can play with Mongo if you want, or you can take off. If you're not done, you're free to work, on things, get caught up, and we'll start this for real on Thursday. Oh, so for a screenshot, you could either do the compass thing, or you could do one of the one of these would work too. All I want is a little bit of evidence that it was installed. That's all I need. It's Conger Prep at congerprep.blogspot.com. Prep, blogspot.com. That's a database where I try to go into things. That's a blog where I try to go into things with more depth. So there's different things there. Could be that the half that had to work on things isn't here too.
All these repeat things are things that he's going to do on his own. I think, yeah. So,
Also, don't I learned last time? Yeah, don't enter it here. Yeah, go to. And you guys were pretty close too.
He's the.
I'm gonna shut this off because it keeps telling me that the bulb's gonna die. Usually when I first turn it on every day, it says this bulb needs to be replaced. No, it just says contact your. It might have, but it might not. All I gotta do is-
Just make sure that you delete these things. And you delete your long Alright, I'll see you Thursday.
It's supposed to be turned down. Yeah, and what they're supposed to do there actually.
But that was school.
No, for the school. So they're gonna build an IT building and we're gonna talk about but it's hard to say when that will happen.
Oh, no, not a little bitty short.
Oh, no, not for the.
Oh, yeah. That would be nice.
Yeah,
So IT for the school, and that's what I did.
no, for us.
Oh, so we can move away from.
Right, so what they were talking about, but I don't know if they're really talking, this is what they is, building that actually building up. So storage would bottom down, and then we would have a company. Yeah.
Also, want to build a down.
That one's. Question. So, what we want to do for that is just do queries. Yeah. And did you see the query for? Yeah. Well, what do you have? Did you say the query? Because if you've done it, did you say the SQL?
You know what, I don't know the most now. I was behind and then everything got off me. When I know,
So
I
it's
was
just a
quite
matter
confused.
like.
But then too late. I mean, it's expired already, so I had to look. So I missed. And where exactly? No, no,
So you could do, so you got to do.
Right.
Yeah, but then I'll wait for next time and get it started.
It does it every week,
Yeah, it
the
does.
update. It's fine, this is like my friend, I guess.
Yeah. So those are the questions. And there's some examples on
Well, that's the thing.
Exactly.
There was
And
none.
we discovered. Did you get studio video? No, I'm sorry. The only thing I'm gonna say is radish. Okay,
Oh, yeah.
okay. All right.
So they were called porch, like back porch, got it. They have that right on the wall side. Just go to the job.
I know, but they're not. Compared to.
What's up?
Just one, you don't know what to.
You first need, MongoDB, you just need the Mongo client to be running.
It must
Mongo,
have.
if you go back to Google, there's your desktop, Yes. No, in the VM. If you go down here to the very corner, right to the right of that little thing, right there. There. A little bit more to the right.
More?
Slightly. Excellent. There you go. Okay, and you have compass there, but you don't have the other two parts. So,
I
no,
think
you
those
don't
are-
have them.
Do you want to guide her?
I can guide her. I know where it is. So what you're trying to do? No, that was not it. Never mind. That was wrong. Okay. Program files, MongoDB, server 2.6, bin. Okay. So you have Mongo, and it was Mongo and MongoD, right?
Right.
Okay, and one of these is the actual server.
Yeah.
One of them is the command line. I think it's Mongo the server, MongoD is the command line.
Opposite. MongoD is the server. Yeah.
So here's what we'll do. So MongoD is the server. So I will do
Yeah.
create shortcut. So we'll call this Mongo server. You'll have that. Create shortcut. Yes. And this will be named Mongo command line or CMD. So the reason that this isn't working is because you don't actually have a server running. So you got, let's get the server running. Give it a moment. It will waiting for connections from 27017. So that right there, you connect. There you go. And then when we were in here, what we did was we created a database.
No, the desk.
Yeah. Did not realize what I was saying until I said it. That was funny. Let's see, create database. Okay. I'll open that up. This collection. Okay. And we did insert document. I can't remember what we did specifically in here. It was just test.
No.
You don't know it? Okay, it was like test input or something. We hit tab again, and then test description, and then we wrote our testy test, did insert, and we now have that object in there. I do not remember what the commands were, but if you want to look at the commands, you're able to do it from here. Yeah. So in any case, in order to complete the assignment, yeah, what I did was take a screenshot. That was I took a screenshot of all this, so it shows that you clearly have the compass, you clearly have the server, and you clearly have on the desktop. There you go. And so you can just save that and then turn that in.
Okay, so where are you?
If you go up there to the floppy disk icon, there you go, and you can just like do it on the desktop, and then name it Mongo install.
There's a keystroke to refresh it.
There you go. All right, and you know what assignment that is?
You have almost every activity.
This is stuff?
Maximize it real quick. The Internet Explorer. Oh, or the ad, or the browser window. Maximize that. Yes. Okay. Calendar.
Okay.
Can I see? There we go. Which one is?
On the 6th, the next month.
It is Let's call it.
You can go to the next one. It's in the 60.
All right. Try to find the actual. There you go. Install Mongo.
Are you doing the
What
test?
did you?
You can ask for questions on that too.
It was just the desktop. Yeah. Submit assignment. Browse file. It's just on the desktop. Yeah. There it is. Mongo install. And you got it. Yeah, of course.
It's so different. Let's go on the main or on the virtual machine.
No, that's on your main. Your virtual machine is right here. So you can see that you don't have it on there. You do have Mongo on the virtual machine. So
Where
you
did
can-
you show them?
the picture.
Uh-huh.
It's on the desktop of the actual machine.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, not the
Okay,
virtual.
so it should be here.
Yeah.
So over here.
Where is it?
It was
Right there.
Oh, here. Okay,
Oh, it's-
that's what they were.
Yes.
For I didn't know.
So good.
Cool. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Well, going home.
I don't know.
So, yeah, if you need help with anybody, if anybody needs help, let me know. Because I'm probably just going to browse the web for a while until you need me. Not sure what I'll be looking for. Oh, you know what I didn't do?